Welcome to the New Orchard Show. In 2001, two separate colonies of fire ants were detected in Brisbane, Australia. Experts, having performed initial biosecurity assessments, which included genetic testing, claimed that the invasive species may have been present in the country for at least 6 to 8 years prior to detection. The primary hypothesis regarding the presence of red imported fire ants in Queensland evolves around their accidental introduction through international trade and shipping pathways, likely arriving in shipping containers from the southern United States, where the species is very well established. Why is it so well established, you might ask? Well, the story goes that Solenopsis invicta, which is the binomial scientific name for the red imported fire ants, was accidentally introduced to US in the 1930s through cargo ships docking at Mobile, Alabama, likely from northern Argentina. Initial colonies were apparently very small, possibly consisting of 10, maybe 20 unrelated queens, but by the time they were identified in the 1940s, they had begun spreading at scale. Despite decades of concentrated efforts, the US has not eradicated them and today focuses on control rather than elimination. Why was the eradication program a failure there? As with everything in life, when rather hubristically interfering with a complex system, there are multiple reasons why things went south. To start with, the ants were already established and spreading by 1940s, infesting areas from Alabama to states like Texas, Florida and California by human-assisted means, so no surprise there. Also, fire ants are prolific breeders, with colonies reaching 400,000 plus individuals and queens laying up to 1,500 eggs daily. All the federal attempts in the 1960s and 70s using broad-spectrum pesticides like Mirex were halted due to environmental concerns and total inefficacy. It's worth noting that the annual cost of fighting the ant exceeded $5 billion for control, medical treatment, and damage to crops, livestock, and electrical equipment. There is a reason why the Latin name Solenopsis invicta was assigned to these species. Invicta is Latin for unconquered or invincible. It's a bold and rather fitting designation for the fire ant. Pesticide-based control in USA has caused notable environmental harm, particularly from historical broad applications. These negative impacts include non-target species and biodiversity loss. Simply said, broad-spectrum pesticides like Mirex bioaccumulated, killing birds, fish, and beneficial insects, decimating populations in treated areas. Negative effects also include severe soil and water contamination, as well as broad ecosystem impacts. Overuse, which seems to be the norm when applying different types of pesticides, contributes to insect population crashes affecting food webs and pollination. Quantified damage is hard to isolate, but historical efforts treated over 20 million acres, leading to long-term ecological shifts. Critics of the fire ant eradication program in US argue that the war on the fire ant has sometimes worsened invasions by harming natural regulators, which makes a lot of sense to me. Now that you have a rudimentary understanding how things played out historically in USA, let's get back to Australia. According to official documents, over $1 billion has been spent since 2001 with not much of a positive outcome and with 15,000 nests very much alive and kicking. As the saying goes, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But that is exactly the operating pattern here, leading to a hypothesis that the point of the whole poisoning exercise, the core objective, is not to eradicate the fire ant, but to continue spraying the environment with the pesticides. A properly applied scientific approach would involve multimodal experimentation, frequent changing of variables in application, and most importantly, accounting for all the lessons learned from insights gained from other similar programs in countries like USA, where again, the eradication ended in total catastrophe. After 24 years of chemical interference with nature, the infestation in Queensland has not shrunk, it actually exploded. Detections as far as 800 kilometers inland occurred at a coal mine in July 2025, with new outbreaks pushing biosecurity zones wider in October. It's evident that eradication, applying current strategic thinking and methods, is simply not going to work. And what will be an eternal suppression effort is music to big ag's ears, because suppression means endless spraying without clearly defined goals and objectives. And endless spraying means not only endless profits, but also, more importantly, continuous poisoning of nature, which must not be allowed. My guest today is Trevor Holt, a farmer in Queensland and a leading voice in opposition to National Fire Ant Eradication Program, authoring multiple petitions and calling for reform, a shift to suppression and protection of property rights. Property rights which the government can trample on due to special provisions in the 2014 Biosecurity Act. Holt is very clear about the nature of fire ants and the need to do something about their presence. He understands that the fire ants pose severe threats to human health, the economy, agriculture, as well as biodiversity. But he does disagree with the principal strategy and pesticide application methods by the Queensland government, and I don't blame him for doing so. Imagine this: you own your own property, the land you've worked for, the land you paid for, maybe even passed down through generation. Suddenly, without your consent, without your knowledge, government agents roll up, sometimes with police units in tow, to blanket your soil, your garden and your livestock with toxic baits. No permission needed, no negotiation with the property owner. The Leviathan does what it wants because it's fully backed by the force of state law. Signs like no trespass or no consent to poisoning, they're worthless. The program calls them misinformation and pushes ahead anyway. And that is the reality of the National Fire Ant Eradication Program, and it's happening today in 2025 across southeast Queensland. Unwinnable wars with ill-defined objective is the name of the game if you want to get your hands on big dollars. It's the case with the war on drugs, the war on poverty, a war on homelessness, and the war on terrorism. My read on this situation is that this isn't just about the ants, it's about capture by big agriculture and chemical giants who profit massively from an endless unwinnable campaign. There are numerous reasons why mainstream media is not reporting on this story properly or honestly. Why there's no investigative journalism conducted to uncover what really is driving the current strategy, and why the health of natural environment is being sacrificed for profit. There's no better person to tell this story than Trevor Holt, who has been in the thick of it for a while. Let's give him the floor and see what the man has to say. You have been dealing with pesticide spraying on your property since 2019, including the heartbreaking loss of multiple calves. Can you walk us through what it's been like to witness these impacts on your farm, and how has this whole process affected you emotionally and financially as a farmer?
Yeah, that's a pretty tough question to answer. But to date, we've lost four calves. It's been a little bit more um, over the last few months. But treatment started on this property in 2019. We got involved in what's called a prophylactic approach around the Noah nest originally. That was before the current eradication program. So it was like a five. I think they did increase it to 8 kilometre radius, but it's a radius around the Noah nest. And there were some nests up here at the Gatton University um, that originally caught my property in one of them treatment things. So that was in 2019. So I've been dealing with the program now. It's going on 6 years. And originally, it wasn't even the pesticides that was the problem. It was the noise of the helicopters flying at low altitude, uh, originally causing injury to one of my cows and one of my horses running through a barbed wire fence when they were spooked. And that was the first real problem. It wasn't so much the pesticides back then. I was told they were safe and effective, and I took them at their word that these chemicals that they distribute are harmless. And I didn't even know what fire ant was at the time, and I really didn't even question what they were doing. I just thought, they're the government, they're doing whatever they have to do, to get by. So it was more about disrupting my life, I suppose, having people on my property and the helicopters upsetting my animals. After a while, I did lose the plot because they were relentless for months with these helicopters, and it was quite emotionally draining, I suppose. The injuries to the animals, but also the stress that they get and having this noise all the time. I remember at the time I was doing my counselling diploma, and I was trying to do recording similar to this with my practice counselling sessions, and the helicopter kept annoying me, from a human perspective, just trying to live my life. It was quite frustrating, and then the injuries to the animals and the stress on the animals. So I don't remember whether I rung up on the phone. I recall just throwing all the paperwork in the bin in the mailbox. It wasn't really addressed to me. I didn't really care. But I do remember going through the bin to see if I can find something that what it's about, to get a number, um, or whether I run up the front. There's someone at the front there. I don't recall, but I do remember being very angry. I said, look, this helicopter can't be here. It's causing stress to my animals. And I was very upset about it after a while. I put up with it for quite some time, but it just kept happening time and time again. So, um, and they end up saying, "Oh, that's all right. We'll bring the quad bikes in." Well, they said motorbikes. They call them, utility vehicles or all-terrain vehicles or whatever, but they're just a four-wheel motorbike with a spray bar at the back. And they brought a couple of them in. And at the time, it was must have been 2020, and it was dry, like drought conditions. My dam was completely dry, and I remember at the time they were literally driving up and down my dam like it was some sort of game and fun and this is great, and putting the bait everywhere. And they're putting it down thick, like it was seeding, like seed. I remember asking, "Was this stuff? You sure about this stuff?" Yeah, it's safe as anything. It's no problems at all. And they were putting it on my dam floor. They were driving up the wall. It was all just dry thing, and they just thought it was a big game and fun and yahoo, and that's what they sort of did. But the noise on the motorbikes was still very upsetting for my animals, And I said, "Oh, you can't do that." And then what happened was, okay, well, come by hand. And then they come next time. There's like 20 of them all lined up in their high vis fluoro shirts, and they're putting the poison down like that. And that was scaring them. And then in the end, I said, well, prior to the last treatment that I had, um, there was a calf that died. It was euthanized on the 30th of November 2023. Um, and at the time, I didn't relate it at all to the fire ant treatment. It was just a calf. It was our first calf that we ever lost after years of breeding, over 10 years of breeding. And um, and 60 plus calves over that time, So that's the sort of success that we were having. Never lost a single livestock animal on this property prior to this. And these are registered cattle. They're not just mongrel cows that you just go and find. These are specifically selected, DNA tested with parentage and lineage of over 20 years, carefully selected for their quality in their breeding stock, but we were talking about how lucky we were. We never lost any cows before, any calves, and we thought, oh, well, your luck's got to run out sooner or later, sometimes we're going to have a problem. And we took it to the vet. It was late in the evening, and we got a vet to test, for snake bites and test for, there's different things they can test for, viruses and this and that. Nothing that was known to cause them sort of symptoms was shown. And it was just discussed that it was like a liver problem or something like that, is what was discussed. We didn't really give it another thought at the time. I was dealing with another issue with one of my senior gypsy cob horses had cancer, and we were preparing for the end of life on that horse, which was a big giant loss to our little farming operation. And it was just another thing, and we just thought, oh, unlucky, these things happen, and it's got to happen sooner or later or whatever. And didn't really relate, didn't even think about the fire ant bait at that stage. But less than 6 months later, we had another calf born, had deformities, had like tight tendons in its feet, and it was like it was walking on tippy toes, and that was the first time we ever seen that as well. So we treated it for tight tendons because we'd done a bit of research on the Google, Dr. Google or whatever. Sometimes the calves get too big for mum and might be a bit squashed or something, and they get tight tendons, and there's a antibiotic. I think they just flush an antibiotic through their system, which can loosen up their tendons or whatever in their feet, and away they go. But it had the same sort of cognitive decline as the one that we lost in November the previous year. So it was about we and the one that we lost in November, the freezer was full at the vets and that, and we couldn't take it in for a autopsy or necropsy, they call it, for animals at the time. So we just took it home and we just buried it, and knew we were going to bury the horse. And as per our biosecurity plan to, dispose of these livestock, we've got a big tractor and we dig a hole and put it in. Say goodbye. We sort of, all our animals that die on this farm, of old age, a lot of dogs or whatever. We just make a grave up for them and that. But the livestock, that was the first livestock that died, that we buried on the property. So it was at the back sort of thing, and we're preparing for a really big hole because this gypsy cob was huge, you know what I mean? So it was a really big hole that we're preparing for that right next door. But when the second one died, it was going through. We got treatment for the tight tenants, and spared no expense in that, but it had the same cognitive decline over that 6-week period as well. So we knew that it had to be euthanized, similar to the other one. The other one was sort of left too long to be humane, really, because we've never had any problems before. Normally the cows just look after themselves, and you just go out there and they grow up and they're whatever, but this one we're really watching because of the other one that died. So we noticed it was having more problems, and we were able to pick it up and identify that it wasn't going to survive a bit earlier. So we did sort of catch this one a little bit quicker, but we were able to plan its end of life, whereas the other one was really bad by the time we noticed it, and its end of life was sort of planned, and the timing had to happen at that time. This one we could actually plan it and say, okay, we'll get the vet out here at this time, we'll take it straight down to the USQ for the necropsy report, and we'll do that. And it was very emotional, very sad. So that's the second calf that we've lost in 6 months, and we lost that horse that was very dear to this commercial operation as well over Christmas. So it was very painful emotionally wise, but we still hadn't related it to the fire ants, and it wasn't until about halfway, like it's about 4 or 5 weeks or whatever to get the necropsy report back. But about 2 weeks into it, the vet was sending some information about, they think it's toxic liver poisoning, just on the email preliminary thing. And they were talking about whether there was any fireweed, which is just a yellow flower on your property, and trying to have a look at that sort of stuff. And, I said, well, we've got no fireweed, no lantana and that sort of stuff. But I started looking into it a bit more seriously, and I was just happened to be on LinkedIn, and other farmers on LinkedIn in the eradication zone, this is 2024 now, were reporting, pregnancy losses, like high abortion rates than normal, and the frequency of pregnancies or the frequency of calving was increasing. So they were having more fertility issues within their herds, and others were relating it to the fire ant bait. So then I started looking into the fire ant bait. And I think, well, maybe that's my problem. Then I think, oh shit, maybe it caused the other one that died at Christmas time as well. So then I started looking at it, and then when the necropsy report come back, saying toxic liver poisoning, and what happens is the liver fills up with toxins and can't filter out the blood. So then the blood takes the toxins to the brain, and that's what's the decline in cognitive ability comes to. And it was understandable, I suppose, that these things do happen. And at the time I thought, I'll just ring them up and report them, and just said, look, I've got 2 dead calves now, and relating it to the fire ant bait. And I thought, they will just accept that, and they'll come out and maybe have a look and check for fireweed or lantana and come and have a talk to me or whatever. But they literally ghosted me for 2 months, and it was then that I realised there was something very wrong with the program.
That's really an interesting journey that got you to that conclusion. Do you happen to know specifically what type of chemicals is the government using in this fire ant elimination program?
Yeah, so the ones that they use prophylactically, that they're admitting to is pyriproxyfen, which is distant ant bait, and its active ingredient is pyriproxyfen. And the other one is engage ant bait, and that's S-methoprene.
I want to pause the interview briefly and expand on what Trevor has just said. The first chemical he mentioned is called pyriproxyfen and is contained in a product called distance ant bait. And the second one he mentioned is called S-methoprene, and that one is contained in a product called Engage. Now, these products essentially work like a common contraceptive aimed at reducing queen's ability to produce eggs and preventing new workers from developing. In theory, once all the existing worker ants have died, the queen starves as there are no workers around her to feed her. According to the spec sheet, this process can take up to 3 months. Now, official government sources will tell you that the treatments are safe for animals and the environment, but a well-known aquatic veterinarian called Matt Landers, who researched this subject matter deeply, has raised some serious concern that fipronil-based treatments used in Queensland fire ant eradication program are, and I quote, wildly toxic to aquatic ecosystems and native species. Landers has reported that fipronil, which obviously can be carried by wind and water, could kill fish as well as other aquatic life because it's extremely long-lived and accumulates in the environment over time. If you want to find out more, please take a look at the links in the show notes. And now, back to the interview.
Ironically, it's almost like you can't buy, well, the S-methoprene one, I don't think you can buy commercially. In fact, that's what they state, you can't buy it commercially, so it's specifically supplied to the government. But they're a corn grit with a soya oil on it, and the soya oil is used to hold in the active ingredient, which is either pyriproxyfen or S-methoprene. Interestingly, on the chemicals themselves, is recent developments have found the program, the National Fire and Eradication Program, put out a statement that the soya oil and the corn grit are genetically modified or organisms, GMOs. And that was in their statement. And the reason for that is to make the corn more absorbent, they take out the starch, so then it will absorb the oil better, and then the oil is the right viscosity or the thickness to be able to suspend that active ingredient in. It doesn't really work because I've witnessed the oil being removed from the corn grit in my observations of it. So that does happen as well under different circumstances. But ultimately, their statement said that that could contravene the AS 6000 organic domestic standard, Australian standard AS 6000, and national standard that they accredit DAF themselves for the international export of organic products, because there's no GMOs allowed in that on them properties. So that was interesting, and the other thing about that, just to follow on from that, the regulator of the GMOs made a statement saying no, the fire ant eradication program does not create GMOs as it was in their statement, but their statement suggests that GMOs by definition are live, and you can recreate the corn like a seed or something like that, recreate the product to be regulated. So if it's a product from GMOs, what they're saying is they're not GMOs. So they're genetically modified products of GMOs, so they're products of the GMO. So a little technicality with the definition, but regardless, they're still not, they still contravene the organic standard. And currently, the latest development is, at the moment, their treatment is suspended on all organic farming operations. So that's where that's coming from, yeah.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by the treatment is suspended?
So they're not treating any organic farming operations with these GMO products, the GMO products, which is the prophylactic treatment. So at the moment, they haven't got a solution that is suitable for organic farming. They modified the standards to I suppose, to fit in one of the treatments, S-methoprene treatment. They used to have a 12-month withholding period, and they actually modified that to 3 weeks to be able to do this. And because the accreditors, they can change that, through the accreditation process because they're the ones that own that national standard. Um, but it doesn't change the fact that international organic farmers have a 12-month withholding period on it. You know what I mean? Like, so even though the Australian government says that's okay, it doesn't make it okay. But the people of power done it anyway, and there was a lot of backlash on that, putting them chemicals on the organic farms by force, even where there was no fire ants present. That created a lot of adverse effects there. But now the latest development is that they probably shouldn't have done it because of the genetically modified products that were in the corn grit as well, which contravenes the organic standards. So they've suspended all treatment on organic, um, um, you know, places at the moment until they sort out what they're doing there.
Doesn't that include your farm? Because your farm's organic, isn't it?
Well, I haven't been certified as organic, so we don't have certification. But in saying that, anyone can operate domestically as an organic um, farm. There's no real requirement. You just got to be able to prove that you're not, you meet that standard. So that is possible. So at the moment, we are looking at partners, and we have got a bit of a scheme that we're developing on in that regard for that certification process. That we're still developing. We haven't made any public announcements about that, but they certainly are looking at formalising that process moving forward based on the current difficulties that programs having in treating them programs. So it is something we are looking at, and we do believe. When I say we, the group I set up as part of this advocacy is Australian Advocacy Group. So we believe that choice in how people manage their private property should be respected, and especially when it comes to exposure to toxic chemicals and how people want to live their lives and be the best version of themselves. So, land management practices of private property we feel is important, and it's something that we're probably looking at formalising a little bit more moving forward.
I'm curious how this whole enterprise was explained to you. The Queensland government seems dead set on eradicating these fire ants, no matter what. What's the bigger picture here? Why are they so afraid of these fire ants?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is an ecological problem associated with fire ants. They do cause environmental harm. They're a super pest. There's no doubt about it. Fire ants are a super pest. They outperform any native ants in colonisation. They've got several different methods of being able to establish colonies that other ants don't have. So there's quite a they're a super pest for a reason. They invade. They're very good at invading new areas, and 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 they do have an impact on the environment just with their invasion, especially at the forefront of the invasion. So normally what happens, and it's like this anything in life, there's a balance in life, and sometimes when these invasive species come into an area that's not known for them, they may and be quite successful and take over certain areas. But over time, um, the balance is restored. And even if you did nothing in 5 years' time, it's not going to be as bad on that front as what it is at the moment, because at the moment the fire ants are quite close to each other and they're just invading everywhere, and that's killing all these things. But eventually, the nests there'll only be one fire ant nest per every 50 metres squared to 200 metres squared. You know what I mean? Because they'll start competing against each other, and then more native ants will be able to move back in, and the songbirds or whatever that feast on on these ants, and that they'll get in there, and a balance will be restored in a few years' time. But there is an ecological problem with fire ants, and they do cause harm. I do know a lady that has reported losing 4 sheep to fire ant bites on its neck. No one's saying that, and I haven't heard anyone saying that we're just going to ignore fire ants. They are a problem, and we need to manage fire ants. And in this lady's case, the fire ants bite the neck of the sheep, and then the sheep got swelling in their throat, and it takes about 2 days, and they choke to death. From the anaphylactic, swelling in their throat. But there's a chemical that you can get from the vet once you know about it. Antihistamines, I think they're called, and you can inject it in the sheep with a syringe when they are bit, and you can save that life of that sheep with treatment. So ultimately, um, it creates better outcomes if you don't ignore fire ants and you do manage them so they're not so bad. But in saying that, there hasn't the chemicals that they're using, these prophylactic treatment, they have an impact on the environment, on the soil, on the microbes in the soil, on the waterways, especially severe toxicity to aquatic life with long lasting effects. And so they have an effect. And I talk to you about how the oil drops off the corn sometimes. So if they're dropping them from helicopters, they can land in the open flour, and that oil can separate from that corn, and that's how a bee can come and collect that toxin and take it back to the hive and kill whole hives. Now, the National Fire Ant Eradication Program denies it they can kill bees, but I've spoken to many beehive operators that say exactly that it is possible, and these chemicals are non-discriminate. They're not just for fire ants. They'll kill any ant, and in particular, because they are a super pest, when you kill out all the native ants, it's just priming the area for fire ant invasions, and they'll be at bigger, denser populations than what they would be if you did nothing. So there is an ecological effect for fire ants, and there's also an ecological effect for the chemicals. There's been no research that I can find that compares the two that justify it. So there's no balance in their approach. Yeah.
Trevor, you have described communities living, I quote, under siege from helicopters, drones, and spraying teams, with some people facing harassment or threats for resisting this spraying. What stories from Queensland residents have struck you most, and how has this program changed the fabric of rural life? Or what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. There's a lot of very sad stories about this that's touched hundreds of people's lives. Some terrible, like breastfeeding mothers in their own private homes, breastfeeding young babies, having men look in their windows as they walk past unannounced to treat their backyard. That sort of stuff is unacceptable in modern Australia, yet it's currently empowered. This sort of behaviour is happening every day without notice. So them sort of stories are pretty sad. But one of the most saddest, and there's dozens, literally dozens. I can go through dozens of them, but one in particular was a hardworking nurse, done the night shift, actually an emergency nurse worker, and spending a lot of time helping other people's and putting herself last, and doing the 12-hour night shift, and generally sleeps during the day, and she got a lot of um, puts the signs up saying, night shift worker, do not disturb and everything at the front. That's what she does. And she heard a noise in her backyard, and it's a very private place that she has, and there wouldn't be people walking around. It's not no neighbours or anything. It sort of backs up down a battle axe block sort of thing. So it's not, not any reason for anyone to be there anyway. So she's sort of half asleep and half naked or whatever, lying in bed, and just opens up a back door, and there was like 8 men there in her backyard, poisoning without notice and without consent in her backyard. And she reports feelings of rape and them sort of extreme hatred to these men that are invading her private property and her privacy in her own home. She felt violated and and terrible over it. And it when she talks about the negative emotions that sort of gives on people, it makes you realise the value or that Australians have on their private property rights and their fundamental human rights. We take it for granted, like our fundamental human rights, our private property rights, and our individual choices have been denied by this program. And the impact that's having on people's mental health and overall well-being is amazing. It's hard to fathom until you start talking to these people how much harm it's doing. Yeah.
Tell me, please, does the government send any type of communication to the landowners to say something to the effect of, we're going to spray your property with this specific pesticides on this specific day? I mean, they must do something like this, right?
Yeah, so they do. So we're learning more about the program each and every day. So at the moment, they haven't got an obligation to notify anyone to do anything. They can just do what the hell they want because they've got this executive order um, signed back in 2016 or something, and hasn't been updated. But basically, the way that the Biosecurity Act is written, that they've done assessment or whatever, and they're going to come on your property. But they do try to give you notices and put them in your letterbox and that. But they're generally not addressed to anybody. They haven't got anyone's name on there. It just says to the house, and they just look like a piece of junk mail. And a lot of people probably don't take much notice of them unless you've been involved in the program for a while or whatever, and you know about them. But um, so they do try to do that. But if you've been uh, saying no to them or something, they're very opportunist because most people go to work or whatever, and then they come and check, and if you're not home and they'll just walk into your property and just do it. I mean, and that's what they do and catch people off, and maybe the husband's off, going to work or something, and the mother's still at home by herself and gets freaked out or whatever, and and that's the sort of stuff that happens. So if they can treat, they will. They don't care. They don't have to ask you. They don't need your consent, and if the opportunity arises and they're there and they can get onto your property, then they will. And if they have to, um, if they have any difficulties at the moment, what they're doing is utilising Queensland Police Services to escort them around. And if you don't let them on, then the police say, look, let them on, or step aside. This is um, or we'll arrest you. And that's what they say. So and that's happened about over 2,000 times. So it's not something that doesn't happen very often, but quite a lot of people, and that's extreme because prior to that, they threatened $16,000 fines and they threatened the police arrest, and they really try to intimidate people to consent. And then they try to do deals. Oh, let us on, and we'll just do this one little bit just so we can tick our box or whatever. So having 2,000 plus people go to that extreme through them threats and through them processes and coercive control strategies that they use is quite big, because you've got to be very passionate to be able to hold or hold your ground with them sort of threats and strategies that they use. So
Well, there's very little one could do with armed police with 10, 15 sprayers in tow coming onto your property with executive orders straight from the top. Trevor, as a qualified counsellor, you've highlighted the psychological damage of abusive government programs. How have you seen the spraying programs impact the mental health of farmers and residents, and sort of what coping strategies have you advised to your friends and neighbours?
yeah, so the main thing for me is anyone that comes into the campaign is we've got to really enjoy the campaign. We've got to try and enjoy the process and know that there's ups and there's downs, there's wins and there's losses that we can do, but it's generally the impacts are quite wide that not a lot of people know, because there's even people in the campaign that don't have a problem with pesticides as such. They just want to do trade normally. So there's a group of hay farmers, for example, and agents run by an agent that I know that I'm pretty close with in the campaign, and they haven't got a problem with the chemicals, and they're actually doing exactly what the program asks them to do with the chemicals, but they're still restricting their trade. So they're losing their farms and they're losing their incomes. Um, there's farmers out there crying because they might lose a third generation farm because they're losing business because of just these really bureaucratic responses to this. It's a top down heavy approach. You will do it authoritarian approach. You will do it this way, and not a ground root led. Because a lot of these businesses, especially the farmers, they want to do the right thing. It's their reputation on the line. They don't want to move fire ants, and they're going to do everything they can. Because if they sell their product with fire ants in it, they're not going to get that client again. That client's going to be cranky with them. So it's in their best interest to to manage it properly, and they're all willing to do it. But even by doing all the heavy-handed stuff, and then they need the department to send out agents, and they're sending charging them $300 for an inspection, and all these extra fees and charges that someone outside the area doesn't have to pay. And bearing in mind, we're nearly talking 1 million hectares, southeast Queensland here, so it's a big area. So it's sort of like anti-competitive behaviour where you've got to pay inspectors to come inspect your product that is good, high quality. So there's them sort of impacts too, not just the people that have problems with the chemicals and being exposed to it unnecessarily, but there's also these people that are doing everything right and still being penalised financially. And there's been several cases where people have gone bankrupt, like the nurseries, and the amount of money that they are forced to spend on pesticides for their potting plants and that sort of stuff is creating a big impact as well. The turf farmers, I feel, they were pretty early on high vectors and it doesn't. It's not their fault. It's it's biosecurity's fault that the fire ant breached containment to get here in the first place, and yet they're the guys that are in charge of putting it out. But they're not talking to the community. They're not working with the community at all. They're just coming up with something in an office. We're going to do this, and then if any resistance, they're just going to push harder and push further and push harder on this fire ant war that they're doing. And in the process of fighting that war, they're trampling over the rights of Queenslanders. So it's having a big effect. And I suppose when you ask, what do I tell people? Like, enjoy the campaign is one thing. Have fun. This is $1 billion business, and if we can get them to think twice about a few things that they're doing, then I feel we're having a win. But control circle of influence is what I call, and look at the things that are within your control and those that are without. So maintaining your diet, your exercise, your social connections, and trying to maintain your ability to be able to write emails or do whatever it is you can do for the campaign. But if they do come to your gate and force entry, you can't help that. That's out of your control. So, and I know it's hard to let people violate your home, your home, because your home's your castle, as we know from the movie The Castle. Your home is your castle. It's where you're supposed to feel safe, and having people invade that is very, very hard to handle. But it's outside your control. You can only do what you can do. You can write emails, you can send letters, you can advocate for yourself, you can get other people to advocate for you, you can, write songs, protest, sign petitions, or whatever it is you can do. So worry about the things that you can do and try to let go of the things you can't. And sometimes it's harder than others because of different people's spot in life. So they might be still stressed out. There's some people that are still stressed out from COVID, and all the heavy-handed approaches from not that long ago. So there's some of them mental scars still holding people's emotions to ransom, I suppose, on that sort of stuff. So that's the main thing that I try to work on with people is enjoy it. It's fun, try to enjoy it. I know it's serious and it's having a lot of things, but we've got to enjoy pushing back and enjoy campaigning for better outcomes.
Yeah, that's probably the right way to go about it, finding a fun and exciting component and something that's scary and probably very overwhelming. Your advocacy, from printing quite a lot of brochures, I think you've printed something like 10,000 brochures, you've printed 500 fence signs, it really shows that you've got resolve. I'm wondering what moment or experience really pushed you to become a leading voice against the fire ant program? And also, I'm really curious, how has the community rallied around you to really support your endeavour?
Yeah, it's interesting. It wasn't. It was never planned to be that way. So there's been amazing groups in different areas that, and I feel we bounce off each other because it is such a long campaign. It's been over 14 months now. I've been in this campaign, and another lady at Sanford, Sarah Maguire, she was a leading force that originally that I found speaking at her and set up the Facebook group, and at the time there's only like 1,000 people on there. I think there's like 10,000 people on there now. So it is growing, and I think the more people become aware, the better. But it's not that I'm a leading group. I suppose the thing that amazes me is I used to get all the time, oh, you're the only one. It's only you. You're the only one. Everyone else hasn't got a problem with this. It's just you. That's what I was told all the time. And so I thought, well, it can't be just me. So then I thought, I started just getting some signs printed with my email and phone number, and just see, how many people do reach out, and to be able to, and when you start seeing the scope of it and all the issues, and then you start finding, veterinarians speaking out, and you start seeing whole communities speaking out. You see the beautiful work that Sarah Maguire is doing at Sanford, um, and then you start hearing about how they've done tests on the water, and they're like 1,000 times a safe level of the poisons in the waterways, and when you start seeing other people's problems and dramas, and even talking to the nursery next door to me, and I had no idea about all this stuff, and then you get people ringing you up, when the cops are there invading them, or whatever. But it just gives you a bigger understanding of how much problems this community is facing. And I felt, for me, when I started my journey in the mental health space when I turned 40, to try and get better outcomes. So originally, I was looking at suicide prevention, and I sort of moved towards suicide prevention. Domestic violence was a big one, and youth crime. They were the sort of three big things that I was sort of focused on, and supporting people over that COVID period with the lockdowns, with the border, where some of my clients was on one side of the border and the support was on the other side, and you're trying to help them, literally save their life, from save them from taking their own life. Remembering that like 9 people every week in Australia lose their life to suicide. It's quite stressing, and most of the time it's about engaging with these people and talking them through their problems and giving them the tools that they need. And it was heartbreaking when I didn't speak up during them times. You just accept that, oh yeah, we've got to shut this border. That's what the government says to do, or whatever. And at that time, I didn't really help anyone. I just sort of accepted it and moved on. But um, the pain of this program is causing people is at a similar, if not even worse, um, effect on people than that program that I've personally become aware of. So doing what I can. I'm in a very fortunate position, I suppose, where I'm able to help, just in my structure of my life, being self-employed and this and that. So I can spend time writing emails. I can try my best and come up with solutions. And originally I thought, as a commercial operator, I can just find an alternative treatment method, and work on with that, and then present it to the authorities, and they would take it up, and then that would help alleviate this whole chemical approach, because that was what was causing the most problem. Is even though some of these farmers and these other people were having difficulties with trade restrictions and that, and that's a big issue, but a lot of the domestic sort of people that had a problem just didn't want the chemicals on their property. They just wanted to live a chemical-free life, and there was a lot of fear that like there's so many conspiracy theories about the government's trying to kill them, and that from hangover from COVID, and a lot of their fear that's still there from being manipulated and coerced through the COVID times. That any sniff of that sort of thing happening again has just gotten everyone all worked up. So I felt it was important to try and try and do what I could to help people, and that's what sort of motivated me through there. But as I got more aware of the program, got talking to more people, the more alarm bells were going off in my head that there is something really, really, really wrong with this program and the people that are managing it. Yeah.
The reason why I found you and asked you to record this interview were your social media posts. In few of them, you've described being assaulted by police and hospitalized because you're trying to protect your organic natural farm from spraying. Can you tell us what happened that day and how has this terrible event impacted your views of the government tactics?
Yeah, I knew um, I knew the extreme measures that they would take to get on the property. I've seen it before. I was there at Flying Fox with Dr. Damon Steptoe when they just walked over his fence and didn't care about his reasonable excuse or whatever to stop them. So, and I have been talking to my neighbour nursery here, and even though I did know that, and I had got calls from people screaming when people, police are jumping their fences and this and that, and when women in hysterics, when they were being forced treatment. So I was aware that that's the sort of behaviour, but it's still hard to fathom. Like, you still think, oh, you silly old bastard, they weren't that bad, like, you must have agitated them or something. Like, it's hard to believe that the government that's there to serve you and protect you is causing you this much harm, especially biosecurity. I'm a biosecurity entity. I've literally got cattle and horses, and I do run a farm. So I've been paying for commercial biosecurity fees, for several years. Registered a business name. So it's very difficult. Even though I did know that that's what they do, it's hard for me. It was hard for me even then, even when I got the notice. So it was particularly interesting because my birthday is on the 15th of April, and I got the notice on the 14th of April that they were coming on the 16th of April. So even that, I feel, was intentional, because prior to that I hadn't been treated for 13 or 14 months. So everything they do is sort of intentional with these sort of things, and it's like almost like a military operation, the way they plan these things. They get these soldiers to um, you know go in formation and don't break formation and just march through. Those special training that they do to sort of do that sort of stuff. So, um, but it was hard to believe that they would do that to me, because I had given them lots of correspondence and a lot of information. I told them that they're doing harm to my cattle. I reported it and all the rest of it. So I did think I had a chance at the time, but yeah, it was very clear from the get go that there was no chance. It wouldn't have mattered what I said or did on that day. They were forcing entry to treat my property, and they were using that as a sign for everyone else. Oh yeah, look, even Trevor can't keep them off, because I had kept them at bay for over 14 months prior to that. So, which was interesting. And then I think on that day, 7 of my Australian Advocacy Group clients got treated without notice as well. Some clients had given them training and scripts and everything on what to do, and a couple of them, some strong women were able to prevent being treated with the police there, and the police walked away just with their script, and their practicing and their power stances and their powerful red dresses and that they put on or whatever. There's different strategies that people do, and there was a few people. One person hid inside and didn't bother coming out, and they didn't jump their fence because they had a bigger fence. But so it was only 7 people. They sort of, I think they sort of forced entry on that day without notice, which was a bit disappointing. But I felt that was what was needed to show them who they are, because a lot of the other people, the 2,000 odd other people, there was nothing on social media about it. People aren't posting about the police being this brutal. People are embarrassed. They're scared of losing their job. They don't want their boss to know that the police are there arresting them on their property or whatever, and they don't want that attention and that sort of stuff. Whereas um, I felt it was very important to put it out there straight away. I want to show I want to show Australia, the world, the monsters that are working for Queensland Police and the biosecurity extreme measures that these guys go to treat my farm that has had adverse effects reported from its susceptible cattle, and just totally ignored and railroaded by Queensland police, who are supposed to be here to serve the community, and here they are forcing entry onto my property and empowering these monsters to continue with their way, which is proven to be not only ineffective, but it's actually going to create an environment that is going to hasten the spread of fire ants. So it's wrong in so many ways, this what they're doing. But by being able to um, try my best to put them aside, it didn't matter what I said or did, they were coming on anyway. But just to expose them and the extremeness of what they did, like you said, I got 5 stitches in my hand, cut literally ripped my gate, open, and then literally tackled me to the ground and put handcuffs on me. And I did not swear once to them. I did not show any aggressive at all. But they're still doing that to me because they want to treat no matter what. So by being able to have a lot of witnesses to that, being able to do a lot of footage and have a lot of people put out a lot of social media on that. You mentioned X, but I don't think that's anything that I've done. But I haven't used X. But it's interesting that a lot of people uh, were empowered to create the content to be able to show the world this is what these monsters are doing to people, to everyday humans. In like I'm an everyday person. I haven't had any problems with the police since I was 17 years old. I'm here living my life peacefully in my own time with my own family on my own property without fire ants. I'm managing my own cattle. I'm doing my community service and living the best life I can. To be subjected to this sort of treatment is I would never have thought it. Like 14 months ago, I wouldn't have even thought it was possible. That's how crazy this has become.
You said that you've managed to keep them at bay for 14 months before they did that to you. How did you do that? How did you keep them at bay?
Well, I just think mainly just the letters and the correspondence and sending to ministers and um, just trying to that was the main thing. It's just to try and keep putting in complaints whenever I could. When they treated the neighbours, I just complained about that and I've just kept putting pressure on them because they're breaching their permits every day. They're not even acting to their laws, and it's a bit like a bank robber. They rob banks, and then if you catch them robbing the bank, then you report them to themselves. Like how many of them are gonna, you know, be harsh on them, and then if they are that found to be, they can't argue that they were guilty because of total evidence shows it, and they can't argue their way out of it. They're the ones that are dictating their sentence, and they're not, like it's ridiculous. It's the way that it is set up is literally, draconian. It's wrong. Yeah, it's not a free democratic society how this operation is this program has been operated.
I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit. Essentially, the Biosecurity Act of 2014, Section 261, it says that the officers are allowed to enter properties without consent for spraying. Do you believe this violates fundamental property rights? And how have you legally challenged these intrusions? Do you have a lawyer in your campaign? How did you go about this?
The program has acknowledged both verbally in recordings and in literature that they've sent to not just me but heaps of people that they contravene fundamental human rights and privacy and private property rights. They acknowledge that. They've weighed that up against um, the problems of fire ants causing and consider that because they're addressing these horrible fire ants that are going to eat your babies, that they're justified in doing what they're doing. So that's I don't think there's any arguments that they are denying people's human rights, private property rights, and individual choice. That's what they're doing, but they're saying that it's okay to do that for the greater good is the argument that they're doing. So um, Peter Pham, he's a human rights lawyer. He's been doing a fair bit of work for the campaign, both in a paid capacity and an unpaid capacity. He's done some videos and talked about it. Obviously, I've gone to Caxton. I've gone to some law firms, Caxton Law, and all these free services that you can do to get advice on that. And they've identified, the actual parts of the Queensland are very fortunate that we have got a Human Rights Act, but it's not set in stone. So they are able to violate them should they be justifiable in a court of law or whatever. But the problem is it's not pre-active. You can't pre-actively say, look, prove that this is warranted. You got to be violated, and then you got to pursue it after the fact, and then prove that they did violate your human rights. So it sort of works back to front, I suppose, in that sense. And we are looking at it. But the biggest thing, I suppose, is because these guys have got the Treasury behind them, the Queensland Treasury, they're sort of almost tormenting you or urging you to go and seek legal representation, because that takes you out of the campaign, because it ties you up financially, it ties you up with time, and it ties you up with a lot of other things. So we've been sort of avoiding going down the legal avenue and just been trying to find support and going through a people power movement type approach, and trying to put pressure on them that way rather than through the legal avenues. But I suppose at the moment there's a few legal avenues that have opened up to me now, both civil but also to raise awareness the criminal charge that I'm defending for the obstructing police as well. So we're getting a bit of advice around that as well. I think at the moment it's about $7,000. I think I've spent on lawyer fees just for my personal circumstances. But a lot of the advice that I've got, especially around the human rights and how that works, is universal to anyone can use that advice. And there are avenues we can go for, appeal processes and putting in human right things, and so there's little avenues that we can go to that we explore all the time to try and find things. But ultimately, we're trying to avoid legal avenues and just trying to put pressure through people power and other means, political means, and also scientific discovery.
Critics argue the program breaches the Environmental Protection Act of 1994 by lacking an Australian-based environmental risk assessment. What evidence have you seen of environmental harm beyond what you've explained to us already? And do you think the legal action could hold the program accountable? And I appreciate you're very worried about lawfare.
Yeah, well, I do think particularly this year has been a particularly blatant year. So these guys have KPIs, key performance indicators, they call it, and basically it's based on number of properties treated and number of tons of chemicals put out, toxic chemicals. So they're the two big drivers. So and as much as people talk about conspiracies, and they talk about 15-minute cities and talk about them trying to Bill Gates trying to drop the population, and there's so many different stories I've heard about what they're trying to do, take people's land and take over and all the rest of it. At the end of the day, their key performance indicators are just lines on a spreadsheet, and you got people that have worked for government for 20 years and they got their blinkers on and they're just looking at that number of properties, number of ton we put out. And with Cyclone Alfred, what was it? Yeah, I think it was it Alfred? Cyclone Alfred this year hit Queensland, and the rain event that circulated from around that was very wet. So they fell behind a long way in the autumn treatment time. So they didn't treat enough properties that they needed to, and they didn't put out enough chemicals because there was that extreme weather didn't allow for it. So they were falling behind. So for the first time ever in this whole history of this program, they actually kept treating through the winter period, and that's most the time that normally that people would have a rest from the violations, and they could rest for a while and build up some energy in that. But they just continued through the winter months, and we got international experts. Dr. Joshua King made some statements about that, and also Professor Nigel Andrew made some statements about that foraging behaviour of ants in general, but it's similar for fire ants. But evidence suggests that under 22 degrees, these fire ants aren't very active, and contradicting the scientific announcement made by the National Fire Ant Eradication Program, which ironically didn't release any of the studies that they based their findings on to say that that's suitable to treat through the mild Queensland winters. And ironically, this particular winter that's just gone was particularly cold. In fact, a few weeks of that year, we actually had lower minimum and maximum temperatures than Hobart did this year. So particularly cold, particularly no point in the distribution of these chemicals. So there wasn't any positive outcomes because they weren't treating them where there was fire ants. In a lot of these places, there's no fire ants. But fire ants were not active, and if they did eat the bait, they wouldn't take it back to the queen anyway because the nest was in maintenance mode. And so all that could happen was adverse effects. There was nothing positive. So to me, that is breaching the precautionary principles of the Environmental Act. And unfortunately, DESI, the Department of Engineering, Environmental, and Science, Innovation and Science Department here in Queensland, have sat on their hands since I've made some complaints to them nature, midwinter, and they still haven't got back to me. I think it's over 3 months now. So it's definitely is having an impact, and there is a problem with the adverse effects of the chemicals, and it's just not known. There hasn't been enough local Australian research to establish what harm this massive undertaking is having. So yeah, I would say for sure, for sure, it's hurting the environment.
You face bureaucratic obstacles when reporting calf deaths to the adverse reporting system. What specific legal or procedural failures did you encounter, and how did they reflect broader issues with government accountability?
Yeah, it's interesting, that one, because it's something that you have to research to find out yourself. I didn't know. I didn't even know that was such a thing as APVMA, is what it's called. I think a Australian Pesticide Veterinarian Medicine Association. I think it is APVMA. I didn't even know about the APVMA, and they're the regulator for pesticides in Australia. So any veterinary products or pesticide farming products are regulated through them. So I didn't even know that at the start. So that's something that I had to know. None of the notices that you get given talk about appeal processes or talk about adverse reporting, and they're breaching the Pesticide Act every day by saying it's safe and effective. So you're not allowed to do that against a regulated chemical. You've got to have a qualification. It's in the standards, in the Act, and it's actually like a civil fine for doing it every time you say that a chemical is safe and effective without putting a qualification in it. You're breaching that Act, and I think I worked out it's like equivalent to $8,000 penalty points. But you got the Invasive Species Council doing it nearly daily, and you got our own government members saying these things. So it's like saying that, for example, what do they call it? Say some poison for some weed control, Roundup or something. Oh yeah, Roundup's safe and effective. Where Roundup is safe and effective if you drink it, it's not. I mean, it's not safe and effective if you drink it. But if you use it according to the manufacturer's, specifications, and you mix it right, and you apply it directly on the weeds, in a responsible manner, then it could be deemed safe and effective. But you can't just say, oh, it's safe and effective, because you can't just drink it straight. You'll die. You know what I mean? So everyone has a responsibility to put these qualifications in, but the ABC aren't doing it. They're breaching it. Invasive Species Council breach it. The NFAEP are breaching it, and even members of our own government are breaching the own Act, Pesticides Acts, and saying they're safe and effective without a qualification. And I feel that's very disappointing, and that's what's creating complacency within the workers. So, oh yeah, this stuff's it's harmless, and we can do whatever we want. They're not using their proper safety gear all the time, and they're told that it's harmless when potentially it's not. It's not harmless.
Oh yeah, safe and effective. Hey, where did we hear that one before? It's like a euphemism, really, that indicates to the other side that the matter is really not up for a debate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but when it comes to the reporting process, I didn't really know. And you have to you have to find it out. So the APVMA actually have an adverse reporting framework, but it's interesting because they're the regulators for these chemicals and they provide the permits for them. So theoretically, they assess a chemical, make sure it's fit for purpose, and and not going to be harmful to the environment or whatever assessments they do, and they give a permit. But they're funded mainly by the fees of the pesticide companies applying for these permits. That's where they get like 95% of their money. But so they're sort of nearly obligated to approve them, basically. But and chemicals like fipronil, for example, have been under review for 25 years. Banned in 49 other countries. They're a PFAS chemical, and the National Fire and Eradication Program has 7 products that they use that are PFAS chemicals that have been, used and irresponsibly. But when it comes to reporting the adverse effects, there was no real manual. There's no real information on that. They don't really want you to do it, but the more you look into it, so there is an adverse reporting thing with the APVMA, and you can report your adverse effects. But and you're expected to share everything to them. And then when you ask them, "Oh, you're going to share your report back to me?" When you do your report back to me, and let me know what your findings were. And they said there are some circumstances where that won't happen, and if they're found to be neglect or found to be responsible or found to have negative outcomes or could lead to legal proceedings or anything like that, then they're not obliged to do it because they can't incriminate themselves. And they put that in black and white in wording. So so if we find to do anything wrong ourselves, then we're not gonna give you that information. So they're not going to give you that information. And the other interesting fact about it is they only regulate up to the point of sale, retail sale. So they only regulate up to that point. After that point, it's the Department of Primary Industry that makes sure they're the ones responsible to make sure that they're following the permit, restrictions or the constraints that are put on that permit. So they're left in charge, just like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Like they can do whatever the hell they want because if they're found to be doing something wrong, then they go, oh, okay, whatever, and they just say, oh, that's an administrative error, or we'll fix that up or whatever. And there is no responsibility for any of these things. Yeah.
When I was researching for this interview, I was mind blown by this fact, which I've included in my next question for you. The Fire Ant program has spent over $1 billion with questionable results. 1 billion. This is reminiscent of big pharma's focus on profitable drugs over public health. How do you see big agriculture prioritizing profit in the choice of toxic pesticides over non-toxic alternatives? And can I get you to talk a little bit about what those non-toxic alternatives are, please?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think it's $1.2 billion, which includes this 2023-2027 approach that they're doing. So I feel there's still probably a couple of hundred, like you said, $1 billion about now. But I think at the end of this cycle, it's $1.2 billion. Yeah, and profits over obviously. From what I've researched and what people have said, so the biggest thing is prophylactic treatment, where putting chemicals where there are no fire ants is just going to kill native ants, and it's not going to have any practical solution, any practical positive outcomes. It can't produce a positive outcome. So putting these baits in areas where it's impossible to establish successful fire ant colonies in the heavily treed areas is just a waste of taxpayers' money. Literally wasting taxpayers' money. So a lot of these problems that are being caused by the helicopters or by the treatments aren't creating positive outcomes on the fire ant populations. And this is proven in the fact that since this 2023-2027 program started, so that's obviously like over 2 years ago now, every month they report more suburbs getting added to the fire ant distribution zone. So the eradication zone's moving every month. So the line's moving out anyway. It's not shrinking. So there's supposed to be an outside-in approach, and they're supposed to be moving the border in all the time. But every month of this 2023-2027 project, the area has moved. And this is what's caused problems. So For example, with hay farmers, they got their hay sorted. They're outside the the fire ant biosecurity areas and living their life happily. And then suddenly overnight they change that border on them, and suddenly their hay is not stored to specifications, and then they can't move that hay off their property because someone moved this mine overnight with no notice, and this guy's left to throw out $100,000 worth of hay because he's not allowed to move it off his property. So it is not working. Fire ant distribution is growing. It's not getting smaller. Evidence has been provided, and a lot of commentators had said that fire ant eradication is impossible, and and it seems to be proven to be true. They are. They're growing every month. Um, so it can't be about eradicating fire ants because there's been no evidence of that in 25 years. They've discovered these things in 2001, and many suggest when they discovered them in 2001, I think it was about 40,000 hectares back then of distribution. They said because they'd been there between 10 and 20 years prior to that, even when they first discovered them, there's evidence to suggest that they were already unable to eradicate them. It wasn't technically feasible, even at that early stage in 2001. So certainly not now. But it does seem to me that they're prioritising. Like I said, the KPIs are more about number of properties treated, tons of chemicals put out. They're not having a key performance indicator of actually reducing the population of fire ants. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting paid because as a key performance indicator, if you try and your goal was to eradicate fire ants and get less fire ants, and every month the fire ant map is growing, then you're obviously not doing your job. It's not working, and it can't work. It's not working now. So, number of reasons for that. When we talk about the prophylactic approach with this broadcast baiting that they're doing, the fire ants develop what's called a resistance to the chemical. So they develop a resistance so it doesn't have an impact on them anymore. That's one of the problems. Another problem is bait shyness, where the fire ants learn not to take the bait back to the queen. So that happens as well. And also the other thing is the baits, as discussed before, are non-target specific to fire ants, and they kill any ants, which means that it can hasten the spread. So there's several reasons why it can't work. When you're talking about direct nest treatment, which is what they're avoiding, and the reason why they're avoiding to doing it is some of these areas where it's heavily infestated, there's thousands of fire ants nests. And if you're going to put fipronil and all these nests to treat them, you're just going to have cancers everywhere. It's a PFAS chemical. It's a known human carcinogenic, and it's simply impractical to put that much poison down. And then bearing in mind in a couple of months there'll be more fire ants and you'd have to do it again and again and again. So to me, alternatives makes a lot of sense, especially in school areas where kids are playing on school grounds and or sporting fields, particularly any waterways or anywhere where any chemicals can get into waterways under normal, raining situations. So there's a lot of applications for organic farmers is another one. And one of the methods that I've been looking at quite intensely is from Professor Joshua King from Central Florida. He had a patented concept where he has a direct nest treatment with hot water, and that was working very successfully for him over in the States. And in fact, he was celebrated, and he won like $100,000 US for innovation over there, for his work in the field. And over here, we're just ignoring it. So it's quite bizarre. So I spent about $50,000 so far on alternatives. I built one of his machines over here using Australian, off-the-shelf parts and retrofitting it out to meet his specifications. And I've been out treating fire ants, doing some videos, and I've had some commercial contract where people pay me money for it. Southern Cross University paid me for my machine and time to do a pilot program for them. So we've done that. But I do feel that that's a very successful way of treating actual fire ants and managing properties, especially if someone doesn't want to use the toxic chemicals. It does give people an option and help them meet their biosecurity obligation, which I do feel we do all have a biosecurity obligation to manage fire ants the best way we can. But having non-toxic approaches to people that have problems with the chemicals, toxic chemicals, is a no-brainer. It should be done. Why aren't we respecting people's lifestyle choices? It's really bizarre. We respect people's other lifestyle choices, but not the toxic chemical ones. It just seems really un-Australian to me.
I think it's not just un-Australian, it's anti-human at its core. There's something deeply nefarious going on with this excessive distribution of toxic chemicals across the board, I'd say. Now, Queensland's Agriculture Minister has called your claims misinformation. Well, how original. That is similar to Big Pharma's labelling critics as anti-science. How do you counter these accusations, and what parallels do you see in how both industries discredit dissenters like yourself?
I think the thing that I look at is the science. I've been very blessed, I suppose, in having some support from Josh King, Professor Joshua King from University of Central Florida. Despite all the white noise and all the labelling of me being a conspiracy theorist and all the attempts to discredit me and label me as menacing or threatening or harassing workers unjustifiably, all these things which I haven't done, trying to discredit me. And a lot of work's been done off the scenes to try and um, even discredit me amongst my supporters, my support network. Um, Underhandedly, there's been a lot of that going on too. There's so much that I haven't gone public with yet, but it will come out, and even some stuff that local members have done um, to try and discredit me as well. But I've been very blessed in that I have had that support um, with this hot water approach um, and alternative, and I'm very passionate about that. And I suppose the support comes from other people that are very passionate about this non-chemical approach as well. So I've got a lot of support to the contrary to what they're saying. So there's I have like there's veterinarians that have come out and said, that these chemicals are killing dogs. They are killing. I've had bee people say that they're killing bees. I have people telling me that they're having rashes, attributed to these chemicals. There's all sorts of adverse effects. I've seen with my own eyes dozens of medical certificates stating that these people have chemical sensitivities to these chemicals. So um, uh, labeling science or and the fact that I've got an open letter from one of the fire ant leading experts in Joshua King, Professor Joshua King, for talking about the effects that these chemicals are having on non-target species, and I've seen their own reports, in scientific literature that they produced back in 2003, talking about the adverse effects. So I'm very blessed, I suppose, in the fact that I've had me mental health training, and I did go through my counselling course, and I'm very confident that I know who I am as a person. So labels that other people give me are none of my business. I don't really worry too much about that. I know who I am, and I know the motives why I do things. So I don't need to worry about if other people think my motives are different to what they are, or I don't really need to think that if someone says something, that's what I must be. You know what I mean? So, but it does give me some heart that there are like over a dozen scholars, whether they be professors or doctors or PhD, things that are in specific fields of veterinary practitioners, research analysis, chemical analysis people, bug scientists, whatever they're called, and all that sort of stuff that do support me. And in fact, I've had their own program scientists ring me up supporting me, saying that they can't talk out public because they'll lose their job, but they support what I'm doing and actually give me some things about negative things about what these chemicals are doing to things like lady beetles and dung beetles as well, and all the adverse effects that creates. So I feel that the more they attack me, and I don't know whether you've seen the ABC article lately calling me a conspiracy theorist and criticising me for working with the university for a pilot program on this. So here I am with a commercial contract with two major universities doing science out of my own pocket on chemical alternatives because the public's having issues with the chemicals, and they're calling me a conspiracy theorist instead of supporting me. It seems to be very bizarre. And I feel that when you start looking at these heavy-handed approaches and these bizarre things that are going on, it's more of a reflection on them. And I'm strong enough to see that and know who I am, not to take it personally. Yeah. But some days you go through ups and downs too when I say all that. But ultimately, that's I know who I am, and I know what my motives are, and I am very well supported. So.
Trevor, what's next for you? How are you planning to continue to fight the government overreach, and what can people in the audience do to help you? Do you have a GoFundMe account? How can people find you, and how can they support you?
Yeah, so I set up my my main thing was commercial operations. So my main motto from even from a young age is competitive commercial operations create fit for purpose, cost effective, and customer focused solutions. So in the commercial world, if you're not doing what people want you to do, you're going to fall over. You're going to lose your business. You're going to lose your clients, and you're not going to make any money. And you have to adapt. You have to adapt to what people want. Whereas in the political, these bureaucratic, government departments, they decide what people want and they make them have it because they can roll over you because they're the government. You know what I mean? People got no choice. There's no alternatives. There's no choice. That they must do that. But that's the way they're thinking. So instead of having a community-led approach, they have this top-down, heavy-handed approach and just try to force people into doing things that they don't want. They don't want to work on it. So my main focus has been trying to promote commercial operations and trying to create a commercial biosecurity industry that can compete against the government biosecurity industry. Because at the moment, there is no competition there. There's no independent scientists, there's no independent research, there's no independent, universities, or there's no independent, anything like that to do any of that sort of stuff. It's all funded through the government, and people can't talk out because they're employed by the government, and their employment contracts say that they can't speak out against government programs. And I've been told that dozens and dozens of times. So the main thing that I'm trying to do now is develop commercial industry. And I'm going to focus on biosecurity. So I'm setting up a commercial biosecurity industry where I will treat fire ants with an alternative solution, and if people want to support that, they are empowered to support that. So what I want to try and do is campaign against choice. So the only way you can make these government departments change their way, you've got to make them. They're not going to just walk away from what they're doing. They don't want to admit that they're wrong. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. They don't want to admit that the people that they work for deserve better than what they've been providing. So they're very stubborn in their behaviour. So creating commercial, like I said, fit for purpose, cost effective, and customer focused solutions that people support, I feel will have better outcomes. But at the moment, it's very tough because even if people want to be chemical free and do support and pay for chemical alternatives, they're going to force the chemicals onto them anyway, regardless. You know what I mean? So that's the problem that we have. So I've got what's called Australian Advocacy Group is the group that I've set up, and people can support that by becoming members, I suppose, and helping. We've got, like you said, that organic that we talked about earlier. We've got some organic certification protocols coming in, and people can talk to me about that as well to offer support. But obviously, if you've got fire ants and you want them treated, then that's a commercial service that we can offer to treat fire ants, and all that money's going towards the campaign, and providing it. But if you're in a position where you can provide academic support in regards to research or writing academic papers on the program, then that would be beneficial for us. But basically, we're just trying to get people to say no, to keep saying no, and to force them to get the police to come to treat it. So we don't want anyone to go to my extreme and obstruct them and get charged with criminal offence and all the rest of it. but you don't have to help them at all. You can make them jump your fence. You can make them cut your locks. You can make them go to the extreme business that they have to go to, because that's got to be recorded. And eventually there's going to be a cost analysis done and say, look, we can't afford to keep forcing entry on these people. There's just too many of them now, and that's the message that I want. If you want to initiate change, you've got to create, the change, and you've got to, find support and be public about it, So that's what I encourage people to do. If people want to help out, if people can help out. So we've got like an art piece that someone drew, a beautiful piece that had the two calves that were euthanized first, painted. It's called End of the Rainbow. Beautiful 50 centimetre by 57 inch stretch canvas, painted by a beautiful artist down in Sydney. She donated it to the campaign, so we're trying to find a home for that. If someone wants to buy that, that's available, and a few other fundraisers. Lynn Sutherland's got a movie she's taken to all the cinemas, Toxic Waters. So support that movement as well. And there's a lot of things going on like that. So the thing is, just reach out to the aagpilot.com is the website. Subscribe to any posts that I put up. But if you scroll down the navigation bar, just reach out and type in your name and, all your details there, and send me a message, and, I can reach out for you.
That is wonderful stuff. I'll put all the links in the show notes as per usual. Trevor Holt, thank you very much for sharing your story with us today.
No worries. Thanks for having me, guys.
I hope you found Trevor's story informative, interesting, and shocking enough to get involved. To me, personally, it's not just about the fire ant eradication program, which I believe is now completely misguided and out of control, but a bigger and accelerating pattern of poisoning everything that's natural with ever more potent chemicals. Side is a Latin-derived suffix that means killer of, or a substance that kills. Manufacturing of these substances is big business, and the business with its army of lawyers, PR and advertising agencies and government lobbies is very clever at finding new target environments for its toxic products. Think about that next time you see a hazmat wearing person at your local children's playground spraying Roundup or something akin to it. For Trevor Holt, it is about fire ant eradication program, as he, like all his neighbours, has been directly affected by government actions and relentless campaign against the ant. He's got real skin in the proverbial game. In the show notes, you'll find quite a lot of links referencing things we have discussed today. Please take a look, and if you can, please support Trevor's group. It's easy to get involved, and it's easy to stay informed. You can help protect Australia's environment, wildlife and communities by supporting sustainable fire ant management. I'm going to conclude this episode with a relevant clip from a recent Senate estimate session where One Nation Senator for Queensland, Malcolm Roberts, questioned Minister Chisholm and Acting Secretary of the Department, Ms. Justine Saunders, regarding the ongoing mismanagement of the fire ant eradication program in southeast Queensland. Have a listen and land your own conclusions. Thank you very much for your attention today, and see you next time.
Okay, I'd like to move on to fire ants and a broad overview of the federal government exercising to ensure the states are successful, because we're using federal funds in the National Fire Ant Eradication Program.
So thank you, Senator Acting Deputy Secretary of Biosecurity Operations and Compliance Group, Christy Slawczak. So we've been very closely monitoring the delivery of the program as chair of the National Management Group, and as also a key party to all of the governance program and also the technical committee. We've also been working with Queensland and the program specifically by providing compliance and enforcement officers, some assistance around communications.
You've been providing them to Queensland?
Yes, we have.
What are their duties?
Sorry?
What are their duties?
So to provide, for example, assistance on a compliance and enforcement framework, noting that there were a number of detections of importance, having a look at the sort of compliance and enforcement activities done around that, and also working with the program to assess the triggers and the risks, if any of them are being met as a result of the detections. Also working with them to strengthen communications and looking at the messaging that's getting out, particularly some of the success stories, but also some of the targeting of the right messages. And then also because we are the National Management Group Committee Chair, providing some advice on governance and cost-sharing arrangement. So we work very closely with them to monitor the program, given that there is a significant investment, but also given that we do have that national coordination role in the governance.
Okay, that's where I'd like to go with this, because we do provide a lot of money from the federal taxpayers providing a lot of money for this Queensland program, largely Queensland. Is this government aware of the overreach and intimidating tactics being taken by the states and breaches of regulations on pesticides, particularly in southeast Queensland, sad to say, forcing their way into properties and causing fear and distress to landowners, upsetting women and terrifying crying children? Are you aware of that?
No, we're not, Senator.
Well, it's going on. It's rife. Since when is it okay for gates and fences to be broken down with police presence, threatening those with reasonable excuses who withhold consent to strangers forcing their way onto properties, with the view to unlawfully spreading poison when there is not a fire ant within Kui, in breach of the pesticide regulations? Are you aware of that?
No, Senator.
This is exactly what happened recently at Beachmont and Laidley and other places when property was damaged and officers behaved like criminals in a home invasion while trespassing on private land. The violence came from the officers, not the landowners. I've talked with the landowners. Are you aware of that?
Senator, we've got no evidence to suggest unlawful or misconduct by the program in undertaking their compliance activities.
Can I send you evidence?
Of course, Senator.
Okay, thank you. A property owner, are you aware that a property owner may obstruct and refuse access to officers if they have a reasonable excuse?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Senator?
Are you aware that a property owner may obstruct and refuse access to officers, that's Fire and Eradication Program officers, if they have a reasonable excuse?
To be honest, I don't know the specifics of the legislation under which the program operates in terms of the compliance enforcement. There's state laws and the questions better directed at state government.
Well, the Biosecurity Act says that they can have a reasonable excuse and then they cannot go onto the property.
We're not applying the Commonwealth Biosecurity Act in
No,
relation
it's
to this program.
state.
I'm not familiar with their legislation, Senator.
Do you think it's a reasonable excuse to obstruct when a resident has an illness such as asthma or other respiratory ailments confirmed by a medical certificate, likely to be made worse by exposure to toxic chemicals, particularly when being sprayed?
Senator, I don't think it's appropriate for me to comment on facts that I'm not familiar with and are the responsibility of state jurisdiction.
Minister, is it a reasonable excuse to obstruct when the chemicals present represent a threat to domestic animals, dogs, cats, birds, if they're exposed to the toxic chemicals?
I'm not aware of those circumstances, Senator Roberts.
Is it a reasonable excuse to obstruct when the chemicals are not being administered according to the safety requirements under the permits issued by the APVMA?
Again, I'm not aware of any existences of that.
Thank you for your truthfulness. It's very helpful. And I'm not trying to have a gotcha moment, but this is very serious in Queensland. Why is aerial application of pyroxyprofen occurring on a wide scale on areas where no fire ants have been identified, ever, when the permit number PER 87728 clearly states by way of restraint, quote, do not apply as a preventative measure for red imported fire ant control? Are you aware of that?
No, Senator.
Is it a reasonable excuse, Minister, to obstruct when the administrating authority has already disastrously polluted a significant waterway in the Sanford Valley? You'd be familiar with the beauty of that valley, near Brisbane, killing extensive native marine, reptile and insect species?
I'm not aware that's the case, Senator Roberts.
Okay. Is it a reasonable excuse to obstruct when the chemicals have already been shown to not discriminate between insects that have already wiped out thousands of native ants and native bees and their hives?
I'm not aware that's the case.
Okay. By the way, I'm not expecting you to be aware, so thank you.
And also not with any evidence, Senator, that's the case.
No, I'll get people to contact you about that. Where is the environmental safety research that has been done to establish the safety of humans and our native birds and small animals when poisoned insects form part of their food chain? Is there any?
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator.
Okay. Who's responsible for determining what constitutes a reasonable excuse?
As I said, that's a state matter. You need to have to get state government.
Shouldn't it be up to a court to decide this crucial question?
Once again, that's a matter for the state government.
Will the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and what's the other F? Forestry step up to pay compensation to those affected by the misapplication of the fire ant eradication program in Queensland, thanks to the use of federal funds? Are you responsible?
My comments, Senator. No, they're matters for the state.
Thank you for your direct answers. I'll get some contacting.
Welcome.